My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I stared at the transfer papers my own father slid across the table. Two lawyers in expensive suits sat beside him. My mother wouldn't even look at me. Sign it, Kimberly. 5,000 a month. That's generous. Generous. For my grandfather's $8.5 million company. The one he built from nothing. The one he left to me, not my father. I picked up the pen. Everyone held their breath. Then I made one phone call. 15 minutes later, those lawyers ran out like the building was on fire. What did my grandfather know about my father that I didn't? The stories on this channel are created solely for entertainment, educational, and storytelling purposes. While some stories are inspired by real situations submitted by viewers via email, most details have been fictionalized, combined, or altered. My name is Kimberly Jenkins. I'm 36 years old, unmarried, and until 3 weeks ago, I was just the quiet daughter who showed up for Sunday dinners and never caused trouble. I spent 15 years working as an operations coordinator for a logistics company in Columbus, learning everything I could about freight and trucking, while my family barely noticed I existed. That invisibility used to hurt me. Now I understand it was my grandfather's greatest gift. 3 weeks after we buried Grandpa Harold, I stood in my parents' living room, while my father tried to take everything the old man left me. Richard Jenkins has never been a yeller. He's the kind of man who gets quieter when he's angry, and that afternoon his voice was barely above a whisper. You're just holding it for the family, Kimberly. Grandpa was confused at the end. Everyone knows that. I had spent my entire life avoiding conflict with this man, nodding when I should have argued, staying silent when I should have spoken. But something had changed in me since Grandpa died. Maybe it was his last words still echoing in my head. Maybe it was finally understanding what he had been preparing me for. I looked my father in the eye and said the word I had never said to him before. No, Dad, I don't think he was confused at all. His jaw tightened. My mother Diane, sitting on the couch behind him, reached for his hand. She had already chosen her side. She always did. The will reading had been 2 weeks earlier. Grandpa Harold built Jenkins Freight from a single truck in 1962 into a company worth $8.5 million. 60 years of early mornings, honest deals, and treating his drivers like family. When the attorney read the terms, the room went silent. Everything went to me, not to my father, Richard, his only son, not to my younger brother, Marcus, who had fled to California 8 years ago and wanted nothing to do with any of us. To me, the invisible middle child who nobody ever thought about twice. I watched my father's face as the words sank in. He didn't react the way I expected. There was no shock, no grief, no confusion, just calculation. Like he was already planning his next move. What I didn't understand then was why Grandpa had chosen me. But the signs had been there for years. He had been testing me without my knowledge. 5 years ago, he asked my opinion about an injured driver who would cost the company $40,000 in medical bills. I told him we should keep the man and pay. He nodded and said nothing. A year later, he asked me to mediate a contract dispute with a difficult client. I found a compromise that satisfied everyone. He nodded again. I thought he was just making conversation. I didn't realize I was being evaluated for the most important job of my life. 8 months before he died, he introduced me to a lawyer named Martin Cole. This is someone who keeps my secrets safe, he said. Then he made me memorize Martin's phone number. I thought it was strange, but I did it anyway. And 2 years ago, I overheard something I was never supposed to hear. Grandpa on the phone, his voice sharp with anger. I know what you're planning, Richard. I've seen the paperwork. When I asked him about it, he just sighed. Your father and I have a disagreement about business. Nothing for you to worry about. I believed him. I wish I hadn't. The pressure campaign started immediately after the will reading. My father and mother took turns. You're tearing this family apart. Grandpa wasn't thinking clearly. You don't have any experience running a company. Even Marcus called from California, though not to support me. "I don't want to get involved," he said. "That's why I left. Remember, I was completely alone, but I kept hearing Grandpa's last words to me, whispered in the hospital as he held my hand. I've prepared everything. You just need to stay true to who you are. And Kimberly, don't trust the ones who smile while they're taking, not even family." I left my parents' house that evening, shaken but standing. What I didn't see was my father picking up his phone the moment the door closed behind me. 2 weeks of cold silence passed before my father called again. When I saw his name on my phone, I almost didn't answer, but something told me I needed to hear what he had to say. His voice was warm, almost gentle, which immediately put me on edge. Richard Jenkins doesn't do warm. "Kimberly, I've been thinking. We handled this badly. Let's sit down as a family and clear the air. No lawyers, no paperwork, just us." I listened to him talk about healing and moving forward, and every word felt rehearsed. The father I knew didn't talk about feelings. He talked about results. Something was very wrong. But I agreed to come, not because I trusted him, because I needed to know what he was planning. The moment I hung up, I pulled out the slip of paper I'd kept in my wallet for 8 months. Martin Cole's phone number, the one Grandpa made me memorize. My hands were steady as I dialed, but my heart was racing. Martin answered on the second ring. When I told him about the family meeting, he didn't sound surprised. "Harold warned me this might happen," he said. "I've had an emergency file ready for 2 years. Your grandfather was very specific about what to do if Richard tried anything." 2 years. The same timeline Betty had mentioned. The same timeline as that phone call I overheard. Whatever my father had done, Grandpa had known about it for a long time. Martin told me he would be staying at the Marriott downtown the night of the meeting. "If anything feels wrong, call me immediately. I can be there in 15 minutes. And Kimberly, don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Just listen and observe." After I hung up with Martin, I did something I never thought I would do. I researched Ohio's recording laws. One-party consent. That meant I could legally record any conversation I was part of without telling anyone else. I spent an hour testing my phone's voice memo app, figuring out how to start it quickly, checking how it sounded from inside my jacket pocket. Then I drove to Jenkins Freight to see Betty Chen. She had been Grandpa's office manager for 23 years. If anyone knew what happened between him and my father, it was her. Betty's face fell when she saw me walk in. She knew why I was there. We sat in her small office, with the door closed, and I asked her directly, "Did something happen between Grandpa and my father?" "Something about 2 years ago." She was quiet for a long time, her hands twisted in her lap. "Harold made me promise not to say anything while he was alive. But he's gone now, and you deserve to know at least part of it." She took a deep breath. "About 2 years ago, your grandfather caught your father doing something. He never told me the details, but I saw the aftermath. Harold was angrier than I'd ever seen him. After that, everything changed between them. Your grandfather started meeting with the lawyers. He changed his will. He started spending more time with you." She looked at me with something like pity. "I think he was preparing you, Kimberly, for exactly this moment." The night of the family meeting, I arrived at my parents' house with my phone already recording in my jacket pocket. The first thing I noticed was that there were 2 extra cars in the driveway. Expensive sedans, not family vehicles. My stomach dropped, but I made myself walk to the front door anyway. When I stepped inside, I understood immediately. The dining room table had been cleared of everything except stacks of legal documents. 2 men in expensive suits sat on either side of my father. Lawyers. My mother stood in the corner, arms crossed, refusing to meet my eyes. She had known. She had known this was going to happen, and she hadn't warned me. My father gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down, Kimberly. Let's resolve this properly." I sat. I kept my face neutral. I told myself to breathe. The lawyers introduced themselves. David Morrison, the older one, did most of the talking. He explained that they were there to help facilitate a fair resolution for the family. Then he slid a stack of papers across the table toward me. The offer was simple. I would sign over control of Jenkins Freight to my father. In exchange, I would receive $5,000 a month as a consulting fee. My father leaned forward with a sympathetic expression that didn't reach his eyes. It's more than fair, Kimberly. You don't have any real experience running a business this size. I'm trying to protect you from failing. I kept my voice steady. I've been working with Grandpa on operations for 5 years. His smile flickered for just a moment. Behind-the-scenes advice isn't the same as leadership. You'd be in over your head within 6 months. I didn't argue. I just waited. I knew there was more coming. David Morrison opened a folder and slid it toward me. There's something else you should be aware of. We have documentation suggesting that Harold Jenkins showed signs of cognitive decline for approximately 18 months before his death. Memory issues, confusion, poor judgment. He paused to let that sink in. If this matter goes to probate court, the will could be challenged on the grounds that Harold lacked the mental capacity to make sound decisions. My blood went cold, but not for the reason they expected. Grandpa was diagnosed with cancer 8 months ago. 8 months. But they were claiming 18 months of cognitive decline. That meant these documents were created 10 months before he even got sick. I thought about what Betty had told me, about what happened 2 years ago, about Grandpa's angry phone call to my father. Suddenly, the timeline made terrible sense. My father hadn't just prepared for this meeting. He had been preparing for years. He had been building a case against his own father, while the old man was still healthy. Richard must have seen something change in my face because he shifted tactics. His voice went soft, almost tender. Kimberly, I'm your father. I'm trying to protect you. I know Grandpa loved you, but he wasn't himself at the end. You saw it yourself. How he forgot things, how he got confused sometimes. Remember how he called you by your mother's name at Christmas? I remembered. Grandpa had been exhausted from chemotherapy that day. He had apologized immediately and spent the rest of the evening completely lucid. But my father was twisting that moment into something it wasn't. My mother finally spoke from her corner. Just sign it, Kim, then we can be a family again. The pen sat in front of me. My hand trembled as I reached for it. 36 years of being dismissed. 36 years of being told I wasn't smart enough, strong enough, important enough. All of it pressed down on my shoulders like a physical weight. I picked up the pen. My father's eyes gleamed with triumph. Then I set it down. Before I sign anything, I need to make one phone call. Richard's face went hard. Who are you calling? We agreed no lawyers. I was already dialing. You brought 2. I'm just evening the odds. Martin answered immediately. I spoke clearly, making sure my voice would be picked up by the recording in my pocket. Mr. Cole, they have medical documents claiming cognitive decline from 18 months ago. That's 10 months before Grandpa was even diagnosed. Martin's voice came back grim but completely unsurprised. Harold was afraid of exactly this. Stay where you are. Don't sign anything. Don't say anything else. I'm on my way. And Kimberly, what they're doing is worse than you know. My mother stepped forward, her face pale. Kim, who is that? What's going on? I looked at her, and for the first time I saw something crack in her certainty. The 15 minutes that followed felt like hours. My father paced the room like a caged animal barking at his lawyers to find a way to stop whatever was coming. David Morrison kept checking his phone with increasing nervousness. My mother stood frozen in the corner, her eyes moving between me and my father, like she was seeing us both for the first time. I stayed seated, my phone still recording, waiting for Martin Cole to arrive. When the doorbell finally rang, I felt the entire room hold its breath. Martin walked in, carrying a worn leather briefcase that looked older than I was. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a man who had all the time in the world. There was no urgency in his steps because he already knew how this was going to end. He had known for 2 years. David Morrison recognized him immediately. I watched the color drain from his face. Whatever reputation Martin Cole had in legal circles, it was enough to make a high-priced attorney go pale at the sight of him. Martin surveyed the room calmly before speaking. I'm Martin Cole. I was Harold Jenkins's personal attorney for 40 years. More importantly, I'm the trustee of an irrevocable trust that Richard doesn't know exists. My father shot to his feet. What trust? There's no trust. I would have known about any trust. Martin looked at him, the way you might look at a child throwing a tantrum. Sit down, Richard. You're going to want to hear this. Martin opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. 2 years ago, Harold received a tip about his son's activities. It came from someone at Morrison and Lane Logistics, your competitor in the freight business. They contacted Harold directly because they felt uncomfortable with what Richard was proposing to them. He laid out a stack of printed emails on the table. These were sent from Richard's work computer at his real estate firm. His business partners had legal authority to audit company emails, which is how Harold obtained them without breaking any laws. He spread the papers out so everyone could see. Richard had been negotiating to sell Jenkins Freight to Morrison and Lane once Harold passed away. The terms were nearly finalized. He was selling his father's company, his supposed inheritance, before his father was even dead. The room went completely silent. My mother's voice came out barely above a whisper. Richard, is this true? My father didn't answer. He didn't even look at her. That silence told her everything she needed to know. Martin continued as if he hadn't just dropped a bomb in the middle of the room. But Harold dug deeper, and he found something worse. He pulled out another document. Richard had been consulting with a psychiatrist named Dr. Lawrence Harrison. This particular doctor has been disciplined twice by the Ohio Medical Board for ethical violations. Richard was paying him to develop a case for having Harold declared mentally incompetent. Martin let that sink in for a moment. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Once Harold was declared incompetent, Richard would petition for emergency guardianship. He would take control of all of Harold's finances and business assets. Then he would sell Jenkins Freight to Morrison and Lane, pocket the money, and no one could stop him. All while his father was still alive but legally powerless. He looked directly at David Morrison and his partner. Those medical opinions you've been waving around tonight, they were manufactured. Dr. Harrison never examined Harold. He wrote those evaluations based solely on information Richard provided, none of which was true. That's not just fraud, gentlemen. That's conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Morrison and his partner exchanged a long look. Morrison spoke carefully, choosing every word. We were not aware of this background when we took this case. We need to confer with our client privately. Martin's voice was cold. I'd suggest you do more than confer. I'd suggest you withdraw from this matter entirely before you become accessories after the fact. Martin turned to me and his expression softened slightly. When Harold discovered all of this, he came to me immediately. We spent months setting up protections for you and for the company. We created an irrevocable trust and transferred all of Harold's major assets into it. You are the sole beneficiary. As trustee, I have complete authority over any transfer, sales, or distributions of those assets. If I see any evidence of coercion or fraud, I can freeze everything indefinitely. He looked back at my father. You could have contested the will in probate court, Richard. With enough money and the right lawyers, you might even have won. But you can't contest a trust that was established 2 years before Harold's death, when he was demonstrably competent, specifically because he knew you would try exactly this. My father's face had gone from red to white. For the first time in my life, I saw him completely without words. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but my voice came out steadier than I expected. I have something too. I placed my phone on the table, the recording app still clearly visible on the screen. This entire meeting, every word, every threat, every lie, all recorded legally under Ohio's one-party consent law. Then I pulled out a folder of my own, the one I had prepared over the past 2 weeks. Emails and text messages from my father over the past 3 weeks, pressuring me to sign over the company. A written statement from Betty Chen, Harold's office manager for 23 years, confirming that she witnessed Richard pressuring Grandpa to sign documents 2 years ago. and contact information for 3 longtime employees who worked with Grandpa until the very end, all of them willing to testify under oath that he was completely lucid and mentally sharp. I looked at my father, and I felt something shift inside me. The fear was still there, but it wasn't controlling me anymore. I wasn't sitting here hoping someone would save me, Dad. I was building my own case, just like Grandpa taught me. The room fell silent. My mother stood slowly from her corner. Her face was ashen and her hands were trembling. She looked at my father, really looked at him, and I realized she was seeing him clearly, for perhaps the first time in their 32 years of marriage. You were going to have your own father declared incompetent. You were selling his company behind his back while he was still alive. My father reached for her arm. Diane, let me explain. It's not what it sounds like. She stepped back like his touch would burn her. Don't touch me. She walked out of the room without another word. The front door opened and closed. Through the window, I watched her get into her car and drive away. She didn't look back. David Morrison cleared his throat into the silence. Mr. Jenkins, given what has come to light this evening, my colleague and I are withdrawing from this matter effective immediately. You will need to find new legal counsel. They gathered their papers quickly, not bothering to take the fraudulent medical documents, and left without looking back. My father stood alone in the middle of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of his scheme. But Martin wasn't finished. There's one more thing, Richard. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope yellowed with age. Your father left you a letter. He wrote it 2 years ago when he first discovered what you were doing. He placed the envelope on the table. He wanted you to know that he didn't just prepare for what you would do. He watched you choose to do it, and he wrote down exactly how that felt. My father stared at the envelope like it was a snake about to strike. I don't want it, Martin shrugged. That's your choice, but Harold left specific instructions. If you refuse to accept it, Kimberly decides what happens to it. He turned to me with a strange expression. And there's something in that letter even you don't know, Kimberly. Something from a long time ago. Something that explains why your grandfather stopped trusting his own son. I left my parents' house that night with Martin's words echoing in my head. Something from a long time ago. Something that explains why Grandpa stopped trusting his own son. I wanted to ask more, but Martin said the letter would explain everything when the time was right. For now, there were more immediate matters to handle. My father's scheme hadn't just fallen apart in that dining room. It had set off a chain of consequences that would reshape all of our lives over the following year. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I received a phone call that I wasn't expecting. A woman from the county district attorney's office introduced herself and asked if I had time to answer some questions about my father. It turned out that David Morrison and his partner had done something I never anticipated. When they withdrew from my father's case that night, they filed a report with the State Bar Association as part of their ethical obligations. Lawyers who discover their client is involved in potential fraud have a duty to report it. Morrison may have been willing to push questionable medical documents across a table, but he wasn't willing to go down with a sinking ship. The DA opened a formal investigation into elder abuse conspiracy and document fraud. Investigators interviewed Betty Chen, the 3 employees I had gathered statements from, and Dr. Lawrence Harrison, the psychiatrist who had been paid to write fake evaluations of my grandfather. Harrison folded immediately and provided everything he had in exchange for leniency. My father's options narrowed very quickly after that. His own lawyers, the new ones he hired after Morrison fled, advised him to take a deal. Fighting the charges would mean a public trial, media attention, and the very real possibility of prison time on multiple felony counts. 2 months after that family meeting, my father stood in front of a judge and pleaded guilty to attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person. The felony was reduced to a misdemeanor as part of the agreement. He received 3 years of probation, a $50,000 fine, and 200 hours of community service at a senior center. There was also a permanent restraining order preventing him from any contact with Jenkins Freight or its assets. Most importantly, he now had a criminal record that would follow him for the rest of his life. It wasn't prison, But for a man who had spent 60 years building a reputation in this community, it was devastating enough. The consequences cascaded from there, like dominoes falling. His partners at the real estate firm called an emergency meeting and dissolved their partnership, citing irreconcilable differences in business ethics. Nobody wanted their name associated with his anymore. The private investors he owed $340,000 to demanded immediate repayment. Without income from the partnership, and with his reputation in ruins, he had no way to refinance or negotiate. He was forced to liquidate his retirement accounts to pay them off. The country club where he had been a member for 25 years quietly declined to renew his membership. Former friends stopped returning his calls. Even Morrison in Lane Logistics, the competitor he had been secretly negotiating with, issued a public statement distancing themselves from any individual who had misrepresented their authority to negotiate on behalf of Jenkins Freight. By the end of that year, my father had sold the large family home where I grew up. He couldn't afford the mortgage payments anymore. He moved into a small condo on the other side of Columbus alone. My mother's journey was slower and more complicated. 32 years of marriage don't dissolve overnight, even after the kind of betrayal she witnessed in that dining room. For the first month after she walked out, she stayed with her sister in Cincinnati. She told everyone she just needed time to think. She called me once during that period, and the conversation was painfully awkward. "I didn't know," she said, "about any of it. I thought your father was just frustrated about the will. I never imagined he would do something like this." I didn't offer her the easy forgiveness she was looking for. "You knew something was wrong at that meeting, Mom. You knew before I even walked in the door. There were lawyers sitting at the table and legal documents everywhere, and you didn't warn me. You didn't say a word." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I'm not ready to talk yet," I told her. "Maybe someday, but not now." I hung up before she could respond. By the 6th month, my mother had moved back to Columbus, but not back to my father. She filed for legal separation, citing a fundamental breakdown of trust. The divorce would take another year to finalize. She sent me a handwritten letter around that time. "I should have protected you. I should have asked questions instead of assuming your father always knew best. I failed you as a mother. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I finally see it." I read that letter 3 times. I didn't respond immediately. But I didn't throw it away either. While my family fell apart, I focused on building something new. I took over Jenkins Freight and ran it exactly the way my grandfather would have wanted. I met with every single driver personally during my first month. I reinstated the retirement matching program that Grandpa had fought to keep when times were tight. I promoted Betty Chen to operations director because she knew the business better than anyone alive. And I hired the daughter of that injured driver from years ago, the one I had chosen to help when Grandpa was testing me as a logistics coordinator. She was good at her job and grateful for the opportunity. The first year was hard. I made mistakes. I trusted the wrong vendors. I underestimated how long certain routes would take. Revenue stayed flat, but it didn't fall, which was what everyone had predicted when a 36-year-old woman with no formal leadership experience took over. By the 14th month, word had started to spread in the industry. Jenkins Freight keeps its promises. Clients who had been considering switching to competitors decided to stay. New clients signed on based on referrals from satisfied customers. Revenue grew 8% in my second year. It was modest growth, but it was real, and I had earned every bit of it. Martin called me around that time with information about another option. Beyond the criminal case, I could pursue civil litigation against my father. His actions had caused documented damages to me and to the company. With the evidence we had, I could take everything he had left. I thought about it for 3 weeks. I talked to Betty about it. I visited my grandfather's grave and stood there for an hour trying to figure out what he would want me to do. Then I called Martin back. "No, he's lost his reputation, his business partnerships, his marriage. He has a criminal record. He sits alone in a small apartment wondering where everything went wrong. That's enough." Martin asked if I was sure. If I spend my life punishing him, I become him. Grandpa didn't give me this company so I could use it as a weapon. 1 year after the confrontation, Martin called again. He was retiring next month and needed to settle some final matters. The letter your grandfather left for Richard is still in my safe. He never came for it. I asked if my father had refused it again. He returned it twice. The last time he said he never wanted to see it again. I was quiet for a moment thinking about that sealed envelope. What's in it, Martin? You said there was something I didn't know. Martin paused longer than usual. Harold wrote about Richard's betrayal, but he also wrote about something that happened 30 years ago. Something your father did when he was 25 years old. Harold never told anyone about it, not even your grandmother before she died. My heart was pounding. What did he do? Martin's voice was heavy. I think you need to read it yourself, Kimberly, and then decide whether your father ever will. Martin brought me the letter the next day. I took it to my office, the office that used to be my grandfather's, and sat behind the desk where he had made thousands of decisions over 60 years. The envelope was yellowed with age, sealed with a tape that had turned brittle. I opened it carefully. 3 pages filled with Harold's shaky but clear handwriting. The first part was what I expected. Grandpa wrote about discovering Richard's betrayal 2 years before his death. He described the pain of learning his own son had been negotiating to sell the company behind his back. He explained how he worked with Martin to set up the trust to protect me and everything he had built. But then I reached the part Martin had warned me about, and everything I thought I understood about my family shifted. I need to tell you something I've never told anyone, Kimberly. When you were 6 years old, your grandmother was dying. The cancer had spread, but there was an experimental treatment available. It was expensive, not covered by insurance, and the doctors gave it only a 30% chance of success. I was ready to mortgage the company to pay for it. Your father found out. He came to me privately and said, "Dad, the odds aren't good. You'd be risking everything we've built for a long shot. Maybe we need to be realistic about this." He didn't say, "Let her die." He was more careful than that, but I understood what he meant. He was calculating the odds on his own mother's life. I paid for the treatment anyway. Your grandmother lived another 2 years. 2 years of birthdays and Christmases that she would never have had. Richard never apologized. He never admitted he was wrong. He just acted like the conversation never happened. I've watched him ever since, hoping he would change. He never did. That's why I chose you, not because you're perfect, but because when I tested you with that injured driver, you didn't calculate the cost against the benefit. You saw a person in need. You acted from compassion, not strategy. That's all I needed to know about who you really are. Take care of what I built, but more importantly, take care of who you are. Don't let them make you hard. Don't let them make you like them. I love you, Grandpa. I sat with that letter for 3 days. My father hadn't demanded his mother's death, but at 25 years old when his own mother was dying, his first thought had been about money. About whether saving her life was a smart investment. I finally understood something that had confused me my entire life. Grandpa didn't lose faith in Richard suddenly. It happened slowly over 30 years as my father revealed himself, one choice at a time. I called Martin on the 4th day. "Send the letter to my father." He reminded me Richard had refused it twice. "Don't ask him. Just deliver it. Leave it at his door. He should know that his father knew everything for 30 years. What he does with that knowledge is his choice." Martin asked what would happen if Richard destroyed it without reading. Then he'll spend the rest of his life wondering what it said. That might be worse. The letter was delivered. Something shifted after that. My father stopped fighting the divorce. He stopped trying to call me. He seemed to shrink into himself, growing smaller with each passing month. My mother's divorce finalized 6 months later. She moved into a small apartment near her sister. Slowly, she began trying to rebuild a relationship with me, not as the wife who had enabled my father, but as a woman trying to understand how she had missed so much. We meet for coffee every few weeks now. She listens more than she talks. One day she said, I've been thinking about your grandmother. Richard never talked about how she died, but now I wonder. I just nodded. Yeah, me too. My brother Marcus flew in from California for the first time in years. He apologized for not being there. I didn't offer easy forgiveness, but I offered an open door. Come visit the company sometime. See what Grandpa built. 18 months after the funeral, I closed my office door at the end of a long day. On my desk sat a nameplate reading Kimberly Jenkins President. Beside it, a framed photo of Harold standing next to his first truck in 1962. I touched the frame gently. I didn't feel triumph or vindication. I felt something quieter, a bone-deep peace of knowing exactly who I am and why I'm here. My phone buzzed with a text from Betty. One of our drivers, Tom, his wife, just had their baby. Everyone healthy. I smiled and texted back to send flowers from the company and tell Tom to take an extra week off. I turned off the light and walked outside. The evening air was cool. The truck sat lined up in the lot waiting for tomorrow. My father lives alone now in a small condo across town. He has enough to survive, but not enough to matter. His criminal record follows him everywhere. His children have moved on. His wife is gone. He never apologized. He never changed. Some nights, he takes out that letter and stares at his father's handwriting. He could have been different. He had every chance. He chose not to. And that is the heaviest punishment of all. Meanwhile, I build, day by day, decision by decision. The inheritance was never about the money. It was about becoming worthy of the name. I am. Kimberly's story reminds us of a truth we sometimes forget. The people who are supposed to protect us are not always the ones who will. Family is not just about blood. It is about trust, respect, and the choices we make every single day. Harold Jenkins spent 30 years watching his son reveal his true character through small decisions, and in the end, he chose to protect the granddaughter, who led with compassion instead of calculation. If you are someone who has ever felt invisible in your own family, if you have ever been told you are not smart enough or strong enough to handle what life gives you, let Kimberly's journey be proof that quiet strength is still strength. You do not have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to stay true to who you are. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of something in your own life, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We would love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up against someone in your own family? How did you find the courage? Share your experience with our community. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.